get into the final matches. That'd be well, good afternoon everyone. Thank you all very much for attending. My name, by the way, is Kenneth Bannerman. I'm the founder and head of the Airfields of Britain Conservation Trust, or ABCT for short, which is essentially the world's first national airfield charity. And we're very grateful to be here today to be able to unveil this memorial. As some of you will be aware, we were at War Boys at 11 o'clock this morning unveiling a memorial there, and that event, one has to say, worked remarkably well. So I'll just let the two gentlemen here introduce the two gentlemen here. Say whatever you'd like to say.
Yeah, well, I'd like to thank you all for coming as well, and thank you, Kenneth, and the Airfields of Britain Conservation Trust for organising this monument. In the days when airfields, aerodromes, airports are disappearing under hundreds and thousands of houses, we do tend to forget the history of these places where so many young men died, worked for where we are now, that I think these memorials are a very fitting tribute to them and will enable us and generations to come not to forget them. Thank you.
I will agree with everything our councillor from Upwood has said already. I actually live on the estate and myself there, and some of those here are named after aircraft, several which flew from this base, and it's a privilege to be able to be here today, and once again thank you for coming and for being here to see this unveiling. And I believe we're going to now unveil.
Well, I'll give a quick history of the airfield as well. You'll need to hear the history, and this is why it's all so important. Listen to what we did this morning. The Upwood Airfield was originally known as Bury, and it dates back to the start of 1917. It was a fighter landing ground for number 75 Squadron of the Royal Flying Corps, used for home defence. It eventually was upgraded during 1918 to become an aerodrome as opposed to a landing ground. The person, incidentally, who popularised the word airfield, believe it or not, in World War II was Winston Churchill. That's nobody seems to know that, strangely enough, but that happened in 1942 when Upwood was very much in its pomp. So when it became an aerodrome in 1918, it was used for specialised night flying training, which is still very much in its infancy. This was very important just purely on its own. Shortly before World War I ended, for reasons that are not entirely clear, Bury Aerodrome then became Upwood. It may just have simply been due to the fact of the Bury in Lancashire. Possibly. Come the summer of 1919, the airfield closed down for the first time. But there's a fascinating historical resource that you can find on the internet. It's called Old Maps, if you're interested, that still shows around about 1935 that some of the original World War I buildings, including the hangars, were still actually here. This is, bear in mind, before Upwood as we know it really today reopened in 1937. It was within the boundary. See, some people even say that Bury Airfield was technically separate from Upwood, but we've managed to absolutely prove that Bury and Upwood were the same airfield. So if you imagine, the hangars were more on the south side of what is left of today's landing area. Anyhow, after Upwood reopened in its best known capacity to do with Bomber Command in 1937, the Fairey Battle light bomber first entered RAF service here. That was also, people tend to forget this, that was the first aircraft in the RAF service that was equipped with a legendary Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. This is long before really the Spitfire, Hurricane, Lancaster, etc. At the start of World War II, the operational bomber squadrons moved away to Bassingbourn via Abingdon. And then Upwood, although it remained a bomber station, it then became a training base. Things were better organised in the spring of 1940 when number 17 Operational Training Unit formed here, and it trained crews on Bristol Blenheims. And the main satellite airfield was Warboys just down the road from here, as well as some other airfields such as Steeple Morden in Cambridgeshire or Polebrook in Northamptonshire, which is still remembered in another capacity today. That was where Clark Gable, of all people, served in World War II. The OTU, the Operational Training Unit, lasted at Upwood until April 1943, and it moved to an airfield that you'll all know the name of, Silverstone, when that airfield opened. But apart from the fact that Silverstone was a new airfield, they had to leave Upwood because it was lined up for hard runway building. There had already been a perimeter track created during the war, but they more or less had to start from scratch again. So they built hard runways and a brand new perimeter track and even brand new hard standings in the main. So this took up a good whack of 1943. And this is again where Warboys, you have to acknowledge as well, came into play, because there was a very important training unit called the Pathfinder Navigation Training Unit, which came from Granston Lodge, which is best known today for being the Cambridge University Gliding Club's home. It came to Upwood, but Upwood was closed for flying and care and maintenance. So the unit was based here, but pretty much all the flying and other activity was at Warboys. Upwood then eventually reopened in the late autumn of 1943, and there was a major switching around of units in March 44, when the NTU moved fully to Warboys, and meanwhile number 156 Squadron, which was at the satellite, came here. So Upwood then for the rest of World War II became a very major Pathfinder airfield used by Lancaster and Mosquito squadrons. After the war, Upwood still remained very much active. It was briefly used by Transport Command in 1946, but it still, until the start of the 1960s, heavily remained a bomber airfield. So this is heavily reflected, not least in, for example, Canberra Road. The last flying unit for Bomber Command left here in 1961, but that wasn't the end of Upwood Airfield by any means, because although it became what one would describe as a ground station, it was still a hugely important part of the RAF, used for example, an education school. Now, there were real fears in the early 1970s that the base might close in its entirety, but it got through that worry, and then, as you'll remember, the Americans came here in the early 1980s, and this place played a major part in, for example, the First Gulf War, albeit more behind the scenes. Eventually the Americans left from 1994 onwards. Now, some other sources claim the airfield closed the same year, but that is just an accidental error, let's say, because we now know for absolutely for certain, this involves the gliding club that's aware of this too, Upwood actually closed in a flying capacity in September 1995. And then since then, it's been struggling a bit, I think it's fair to say, with some of the buildings, etc. Although, thankfully, the hangars are still being used very much. The gliding club's still here. So this is still a very relevant place in all sorts of ways. But as we just said the other hour down the road at Warboys, this applies to all of our airfields. Quite simply, we cannot remotely afford to lose Britain's airfields, regardless of whether they are active or disused. They enormously affect, for the betterment of society, every single one of us, in all sorts of ways, even right down our health. That's how important they are. So we can only just say to you that within reason, just please do everything you possibly can to help save, protect and honour not only our airfields, active and disused, but also not forgetting, of course, all the tremendously brave personnel and the families, of course, who have served here ever since World War I. We must never ever forget. But It's in all of our interests to help places like Upwood. And it's fantastic here, of course, with what's been done with the housing estate. This is how it should be. It's not about preserving disused airfields and aspic. As a man said to me anyhow, many years ago, this is way back 1980s, you've just got to get airfields being used, even if they're not being used in the dictionary sense of the term. It's that simple. So this is great what's happening here at Fairmead Park, and also not forgetting even this great recognition of the sign here. Tremendous. So thank you all very much again for attending, and therefore we are delighted to say that we will now be unveiling what is ABCT's 147th memorial. We're unveiling another memorial tomorrow, by the way, if you're interested, to commemorate Maple Airfield. That is at Sutton Village on the northwest side near the school. So anyone who wants to come along to that is very welcome. And therefore we are really honoured to be unveiling this memorial to yet another of our absolutely priceless assets, in this case the one and only Upwood Airfield. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a lovely place to live. Nice and quiet, peaceful.
If there's anything you need to ask everybody, just let us know.